Today we're going to drain the transmission fluid and remove both front axles of the car. Removing those front axles can be quite a challenge, so this is worth its own episode. Next we're draining the transmission fluid. This is seen from the passenger side of the car. We're first removing this filler plug, which is an Allen key 8mm, and then we're removing this one, also 8mm, and we're draining it in a bucket. Normally no transmission fluid is supposed to come out of this hole, but now the car is at a slope, so that's why the level of the fluid is a little bit higher around this hole. And now we're draining from the drain plug. It's almost done already. Also, I noticed there is no thread locker on these bolts. The Toyota manual says that there should be thread locker on it and used before you put it back. Next we have to remove this nut. I already put some WD-40 on it. Also we have to unstake this dimple over here. Toyota sells a specialized tool for that for 69 bucks. We're not going to do that. I just took an old nail and I ground it down to the right width, so you can just hammer it in there like that. Be sure to completely remove this stake, otherwise you will damage the thread when you loosen the nut. Now I did it with this tool over here, and it's pretty flat, so I'm going to repeat it with a round tool so that the shape is more round, because it may be flattened and still damage the threads. There. I'm still not convinced, because now the internal threads of the nut have been damaged because of this tool, so they may still damage the axle. I don't like that, so I'm going to take my Dremel tool and remove this whole part of the nut. Also note that Toyota really recommends or instructs to do not reuse the nut, instead buy a new nut. So that's what I'm going to do. Yeah, I really do not want to damage this axle. I don't know if I can lay my hands on a new one. It probably costs like $400 or $500 for an axle. That's no good. Next, the manual says to push the brake before loosening the nuts, so there's like a rod clamp between the brake and the headrest over there. Alright, next we're going to use a 30mm 12-point socket like this and a breaker bar to try to loosen this. There we go. Smooth! I hope it does not damage the threads. That would be expensive. Looks good so far. Yeah, we did it. Yep, no damaged threads. Look at that. Look at that. No damaged threads. Nice. Right, we did the same preparation on the passenger side now, so we're going to try to loosen it. Yay. No damage. Success. Next, we remove the speed sensor on both sides of the car. So remove that bolt over there, then the clip over there, bolt over there, and temporarily hang it up over there. So the clip of the speed sensor is a bit tricky. To get it out, just use a screwdriver from the left side and push in the little tabs so you can easily pull it out without damaging it. Also, I covered the whole of the speed sensor with some tape because the manual says it's very important not to get any stuff in there. The manual says that we have to completely remove the sway bar and both lower control arms. We're not going to do that. We're leaving them in place right now. First, we're going to hammer out the axle because the lower control arm provides a nice rigid support to keep this whole assembly in place while we do that. After we've loosened it up, then we're going to loosen the sway bar and the control arm and these 3 nuts and bolts so we can remove the axle from the hub. So I put the nut back on the axle to protect the threads while we are going to try to hammer it out. Let's see how that works. Sometimes it's a pain in the behind to get this axle out. Man, this is stuck. Okay, let's try the right side of the car instead. Alright, that went pretty well. We just keep hammering. Good enough. It's loose. So now I have trouble getting this nut off. Apparently the pounding of the hammer has deformed it so much that it is kind of stuck. So, but I can still get it off. But yeah, there we go. I almost forgot to mention, you also have to mark where this groove is here. So right now I just put a little bit of a black mark here. So next time we assemble it, we do it the same way. The sway bar did not come loose because the bolt kept turning with the nut. So then the manual says just put a 6mm Allen key in there and then just, you know, you can do it like that with 2 hands. Also, when you loosen these control arm nuts and bolts, you have to apply quite some torque. So try not to be under the car because it may push it off the jack stands. So now the lower control arm and the sway bar have been disassembled, and now we can tap the axle out. Alright, I had to remove the nut. Now we can drive it, the axle out further. We don't want to hit it because we may mushroom the axle. That's not good. So use a pin and try to hammer it out. And it's out. Do it. Next we're going to pop the axle out of the gearbox. So we use a pry bar, put a piece of wood between the gearbox and the axle so we don't damage the sheet metal of the gearbox. There we go. All right. There's the axle. Now on the right side of the car we hammered the axle through. So let's try to remove it. There. Now we have to use the pry bar and pop it out similarly. So with the pry bar you actually have to be pretty careful. We are pushing against this face over here, but if you push this thing over here, it's very thin metal, and it is very close to a seal. You want to probably keep that intact. We're going to pop the axle on the right side of the car. There. There we go. And there's the axle. Now these rings over here have been slightly deformed when pulling it out, so they have to be replaced by new ones before assembly.